Welcome to today's how-to session on Webdocs Forms and Workflow Automation. Today's topic is how to create my first workflow within Webdocs Forms Management. But before I get into the live demonstration, I want to quickly talk about the kinds of workflow you have available to you when you're using the Webdocs Forms Management system. The first one is a forms-based workflow system. Built into the core application, you can use the Forms workflow system to not only enforce how the data is being filled out in the forms, but also the process in which you need to enforce and its flow through the organization to get the data collected. This can also help you and aid you in the compliance and regulatory efforts that your company needs to enforce in some of your processes. The second option for workflow allows you to go a step deeper, but not only have just a forms workflow, but also integrate a document-based workflow that integrates to each other during the form and document lifecycle. This allows you to have a forms-based flow for the data collection process and enforce that step by step. And then after that is completed, have it update the business system with the data, and then take the supporting documentation and then pass that into the Webdocs system, and then launch that document into another workflow process. Again, we see this scenario a lot when we get into some of the compliance-based data collection and document processes, and the way that certain organizations might need to and have to enforce those different processes. Now, from a demonstration standpoint, what I'm going to do here is sort of build that first workflow for you so you can sort of see how that works inside the system, and I'll show some other ones off here as well so you can see some of the different things that you can do with the application, and then also the core workflow function. So I'm going to log in as a designer into the system here again. I'm going to, if you watched building my first form one here, I'm going to go into I built a container for that in my projects here for my first form. I'm going to use that to create that first workflow. And building a workflow, the first step before you build a workflow is to build that form, right? So being able to have some kind of data collection process or form that you want to be able to facilitate and pass around. So for this purposes here, I'm going to use what we call this purchase order one here to be able to do that. So this purchase order here, I'm going to open that up so you can see what it looks like. It needs to be passed around, so it can be initiated internally. In this case, it could be like a sales rep or an employee that needs to fill this out, and then we can have it flow around through a dedicated workflow. Or even sometimes a dynamic workflow dependent on how we're picking and choosing some of those users and who they go to. So we'll see that here in just a second. But from this first workflow standpoint, it's very similar to creating a form, right? You're going to go into your project, and then you're going to click this little plus tab up on top, and then you're going to say create new workflow. So in this case here, just like we created a new form in the previous session, the new workflow is going to allow you to enter that workflow name. So we're going to call it PO approval process here. And then I'm just going to put that same workflow name as the description here. And then step one, it's going to ask you these different steps. You can do it here, or you can exit out and add them here as well. But I'm going to create step one. Step one is to start PO process. Put some description in there, and then it allows you to select different things here. And you'll see inside that container, I had my form one inside of there. Then I also have my purchase order. I want to use this form here for that step. And then you can sort of walk through this option here. Now, if you need to add different steps inside here, so maybe I want to add another step here quick, you can add that second step to say, and maybe this is manager approval. Put this in here. There we go. And there's different kinds of approval steps you can do here. So you can, and so you can actually for the form, so you can want to use that same form. And then you could do different things inside of from that standpoint. So maybe if I want to, so since this is an approval step, and approval steps in this case here too. So this is where you could, reach out externally too. So if you want to use an email address to reach out externally, you could do that here from an approval step option here. But I can actually select user, role, email address, or anything like that inside of here if I want to. So in this case here, I just have an email address that I'm going to for that second step, and I can click finish inside of here. Now you'll see it's going to pull open that nice little detailed workflow steps here, so you can do different things. So you can move things around. So maybe you want, at the end of this process, you want to be able to send an email to something here, so you can actually move these around in different steps. You don't have to technically send an email at the end of the step. You can actually have that information just go directly into the archive process here. But if you wanted to, a lot of times in certain cases like this, there might be different steps that you need to be able to do for approvals, and we'll add another step in here, and we'll call it a CEO approval, and we'll add that inside of here, and we'll add the step here, and we'll do this as an approval type, and we'll do assignment as user. And then it'll come up with the user information. So it allows you to be able just to select all these different options here from that standpoint. And I'm just going to drop it to my designer here, so it's easier to pull out of there. So then I'm going to reorder these a little bit here, so I can reorder. And then we can also put different things inside of here as well. When we do the reordering and stuff like that, is have the different scenarios inside here. Maybe we say, hey, maybe in this process here, when it starts out here, that the employee fills this information out, it goes to the manager, and it only needs to go to CFO if there's a certain amount or limit hit on that at that point, right? So we can actually set up different kinds of options here and put in what we call preconditions. So I can come in here and add a precondition inside of here. And you don't have to do this, you could do it via JavaScript if you want to, and I'll call it simple rules. But you can also just do the preconditions inside of here as well. So you can say, hey, when the total amount or grand total, is equal to or more than, and then you can use an expression there, or you can do a literal value of maybe $10,000 or something, right? And you could put that in there to say, if it is that, then it's going to go into that condition. So this is going to allow you to build those different conditions. So if it's no, you can have it go out of the system and then finish. In this case, we can have it send an email or whatever at that point, so we can have it go down to the bottom there. But if it is yes, if it's equal to or more than that, then we can go through that CEO approval. So this is going to allow you to be able to create those different steps inside of those workflows and have those different preconditions. Now, not all workflows have to have preconditions on them, so it could just be a simple step to step to step kind of basis kind of things. Otherwise, you can do those preconditions. Now with this workflow process steps, so if you see, if I click on any of these steps here, you see that I can go into the details of this, right? So assignments, meaning who it's going to assign to, what messages they're going to see when they do something, rejection, escalation. So a lot of times in like a manager kind of role, you might want to have an escalation point inside of here. And an escalation point would be if someone is out of the office, if someone doesn't do something within, performed by within, or completed by or completed within time, you can actually say, hey, you know what, you got 2 days to approve this, 2 days, and we'll say 2 days, 2.5 days, so 2 days and 4 hours to be able to do that. If something doesn't happen, I want to take some kind of action, and maybe that action is just re-notify someone, right? Or maybe I want to reassign that task to a different role inside of the organization. So this is going to allow you to select a different role inside of the organization. Maybe it goes to to the finance team or to HR or something like that, depending on your roles you have set up in the system. But this is going to allow you to be able to kick those into those different escalation points and move things along and not create those digital bottlenecks inside the organization. Notifications can be turned on here as well, so you can have notifications, via email coming through, and then also reminders can be turned on as well. So as those escalation points are approaching, they can be triggering those different events to the user to allow them to know what's going on inside the system. So So that's going to allow you to be able to do that. And you'll see here there's settings and stuff you can do here as well. So all these different things you can do, from the workflow, forms, rules, PDF mapping. PDF mapping, if you've seen the video on creating my first form, that might be, hey, at the end of this process, at the end of the workflow when it's completed, I need to be able to create a PDF and then send that out to someone or save that into the document archive. So we have that PDF mapping function there as well. And then there's some fine tuning you can do with the workflows and stuff like that with some of the setting structures in here as well. So those are some of the, I'll call it some of the core functions here from the workflow. And you'll see here on the workflow, when this form is routed around, you can actually show the different steps and where it's going to go or where it's at during this process. Or otherwise, you can turn this off as well as they're filling out the form. It can be more of a behind the scenes kind of a function. Now, from a workflow standpoint, there's many different things you can do with workflow, right? So that one was, I'll call it, it's more of a simpler workflow kind of structure. But you could have, more of an advanced process too, where there could be more rule-based structures in there, or more preconditions inside of here. Like in this steps here, we have, employee starts this process, department manager. There's an approval limit for AP, and also that, more than, the president needs to get involved in or does not need to get involved depending on certain things. But you can set up these different conditions, and a condition can have multiple things involved in it, right? So in this case, if grand total is more than 500 and the approval manager in this case is Greg, then it might go to a certain way because my authority might be different than, as a manager, might have different authority levels inside of the organization. So we can kick those up inside of there depending on those different limits as well, that your managers might have or might not have. So there's many different ways you can do that from a workflow standpoint. Now, from a workflow standpoint, when you're approving, so when that form gets completed and goes through the process, each user is going to be using the same interface and logging into the same interface, but they're going to be going to their what we call My Task Box. So think of this as an inbox, right? And that's exactly what it is. It's an inbox for forms that I have, I have to do something with. And you could be part of multiple workflows inside of the organization, but then you can click on these different forms inside of here to be able to view and do your work on them and do that review process to be able to get that form to the next step. So it's a single interface for designing the forms, creating your workflows, and then doing your approvals. It's all just dependent on your permissions inside the system on what you have access to do and complete. I want to thank everyone for their time here today. That was building your first workflow. Please contact us if you have any other questions on building your first workflow, or if you'd like some help on some guidance and best practices. Thank you for your time.